quadratic equations by completing the square. Okay, so before we jump into our first example, let's first look at the steps of how do we complete the square. So let's say, for instance, a question that asks us solve for x by completing the square. There's 4 or 5 steps that you need to memorize in order for you to apply this method of completing the square. So that first step say, okay, before you do that, look at your equation and make sure that your equation is in standard form. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now to check if your equation is in standard form. So the second thing that you'll have to memorize is make sure that the coefficient of x squared of that equation is 1. Okay, so the coefficient, I'm going to just shorten it. So the coefficient of x squared must be 1. Okay, so that's the second thing. Okay, the third thing that you will have to memorize is after you've done these 2 things here, the next thing that you're going to do is take half of so you take half of the coefficient of x and take half of that and square it. Okay, so you take half of coefficient, say, of x and square it, and then the next thing that you'll have to do in that same tip there, or same tip number, not tip number 3, but part of the method, say that when you do that, you should add that, and then to make it mathematically, then add it. Okay, but to make it mathematically correct, you need to then subtract it as well. Okay, and then finally your last step is to write the left side as a difference of 2 squares. So left side as the difference of 2 squares. Okay, so that's what you got to do as well. So let's look at our first example. The first example say, let me just open up a new sheet. So the first example, we're going to apply those steps. Okay, so the first example says what we need to do, obviously solve for x by completing the square. So the first one is x squared minus 10x minus 11 equal to 0. So now the first step is say, is this in standard form? Yes, because it's x squared minus 10x minus 11. So it is in standard form. The next thing you got to do is check if the coefficient of x squared, is it a 1? So yes, there is a 1 in front of that you won't be able to see. It's an invisible 1. Okay, so check number 2 is correct. So now we're going to apply the next few steps that say, okay, because all of those things is in order, now we write the first term down, x squared, and the second one, and now we take half of this. Okay, so we're going to take half of negative 10 and we're going to add it. So I'm going to write it down in a different color. So it's going to be, we're adding half of negative 10. So it's going to be negative 10 over 2. And we need to square it. But when we do that, to make this mathematically equal to each other, we need to subtract it as well. So it's going to be negative. We need to subtract the same thing. Okay, squared. And there we have the negative 11. We still need to write it down there. So it's negative 11 equal to 0. So now that we have all of these things together, the next step is to write down the left side as the difference of 2 squares. So I'm going to go back to dark blue. So this is what I usually tell the students is, in different books they have different methods, but what I say, leave this here. You will notice that I leave it like this. Okay, I leave it like this. The most important thing for me is I'm going to use this. So all of this is going to be the difference between two squares. So in other words, I'm going to get now open bracket x, and whatever you see here, you're going to write here. So negative 10 over 2 is going to be negative 5, and you close the bracket. So this is what I mean by that fourth steps when they say write it as difference between two squares. Now obviously this here, I'm just going to write it down again. So that's going to be negative 25, and this is going to be negative 11. So it's equal to 0. Okay, so this, if I simplify it a little bit further, so it's going to become x minus 5 squared minus 36 equal to 0. And because we are trying to solve for x, we need to put all the x's on the left side and everything else on the right side. So this is going to become now x minus 5, close the bracket, 2 equal to 36. Then, as you know from your previous knowledge, if you want to get rid of the square here, you need to take square root on both sides. But remember, when you do that, on the right side, it must be plus minus square root of whatever that number must be. So it's going to be x minus 5 equal to plus minus the square root of 36. Okay, so now if you go further, now it's much easier to solve for x. So it's going to become x is equal to 5 plus square root of 36. So let me rather just write it down like this so that you can see all the steps. Or the other one is going to be x is equal to 5 minus square root of 36, because there's going to be two answers. So this is going to be 5 plus 6, which is going to be 11, or 5 x is equal to 5 minus 6 is going to be negative 1. And this here is your final answer.